As we begin the Q&A portion of this presentation, I would like to remind you that there are a few ways that you can participate and ask questions to the study team this evening. If you are joining us through Zoom, you can select the raise hand function at the bottom of your screen, or you can type in your question in the Q&A box. If you are joining us by phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand, and your question will be answered live via the study team this evening. So on to the first question of the evening. We have David Elsever. I apologize if I mispronounced your last name. David, I am unmuting you, so go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
I was just wondering, with the large number of new builds that are going on in Desert Hills, which is fine. I spoke because a lot of these are coming around my house, specifically south of my house. And I spoke with the builder, and the builder basically said, I'm following county guidelines and wouldn't help me with anything. And the people that are buying these properties are shifting the water flow. And in Desert Hills, naturally, the water flow goes southwest. And what's happening is there is no oversight to what's going on in these properties, and it's causing a significant amount of problems. So what's happening? What proactive steps are being taken with all these substantial new builds going across Desert Hills, New River, all these areas, to make sure that these new owners aren't messing everybody up?
Todd, Jeff?
Yeah, and Flora, I'll start with that one, and Jeff or Hassan, if you have anything to add, feel free to chime in. I mean, first of all, thank you, David, for bringing up this issue. You know, as I touched on, the county is a very large area, and the first most important thing is that we need to become aware of it. And then we would work with sort of the entity in particular that would be responsible. And I believe in this case, this is unincorporated Maricopa County. So we can kind of look to getting some of our inspectors out there. The important thing that everybody needs to realize is, obviously, with Maricopa County being one of the fastest growing counties in the nation, as you get more and more urbanization, that continues to change the natural flow path of water. And I guess this is where it's important that we gather this input, we find out the exact locations where some of these things are, and it can allow Jeff and his consultant team to go out, look in the field and see what is happening, and kind of go from there. Now, to get straight to your point of how proactively are we dealing with that, this is something I will have to take back to our folks at the district and have them take a look at that.
Okay.
Hassan, is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
Good afternoon, David. Thank you for the question. I know in the Desert Hills areas, we are experiencing some development activities. Most of these development activities are regulated by our other department, Planning and Development Department, P&D is what we call. If the property under development is in a floodplain, our inspectors will can go out and review those improvements. So if you would please provide your address where you're experiencing this issue, we can screen that out, make sure whether it's in an unincorporated Maricopa County. If it's in a floodplain, then we have a group inspectors group that can go out and talk to the folks and find out what their activities are and how the adverse impacts can be mitigated. If you are not in a floodplain, it will fall back on our P&D sister department, and we can seek out their assistance to help regulate properly. So if you please provide us, Todd, your address, location of such activity, we can certainly look into it and follow up with you later on.
Okay, I'm hoping you can still hear me, and because I definitely will provide that information. My question would be, my neighbors are good neighbors, and I know that if I make it a formal complaint, it'll cause significant financial damage to them. And the thing about it is, they didn't know to begin with what they were doing, because the builders of their properties didn't care. They did what minimal they needed to do. They sold the property, they walked away. And these new homeowners jumped on these properties and had a wonderful time and are causing significant damage. Is there a way to work with the home builders so that the people buying these properties have at least a minimal idea of who they need to be talking with as they build out their properties? Because the gentleman, my specific situation affects four different parcels of people that have been here for a long time, and this person had no idea what they were doing. And it's because the builder just built it and said, yeehaw, go at it. And I feel there's a set of responsibility for the builder there, that that builder's screwing people for money at this point in time. They're just selling properties and not telling people that there's got to be some modicum of responsibility for what they want to put on the property they're buying that doesn't destroy everybody else around them. And kind of that's what's happening. My property's flooding out. My lake on my property is now flooding out people next to me that have never been flooded out before. It's causing me thousands of dollars to try to formalize a flood route for the water that goes across my property. Because
So David, if I could jump in real quick,
Yeah.
it's a tough situation, right? Because the builder probably went through the minimum standards with the county planning and development to get their plans approved, and probably did that all right, even if it was minimal. And then the homeowners come in and they don't know, right? And that's what you're saying. It's kind of a,
now I'm arguing with somebody who had no idea of what's
Yep.
going on.
So it's kind of an education thing from our standpoint. If there is a mechanism to report folks on code enforcement, but sounds like you don't want to go down that path for neighborly, kind of discourse, right? So from our standpoint, this is an education thing, and this is one of the things we're striving to do as part of the study, is educate folks. And we have developed on past studies like this informational flyers or pamphlets that talk about this exact thing, about how you can't change flow paths or alter water courses that affect your adjacent properties. So that's something we'll definitely be looking to do as part of that solution suite that we developed for this study. But you're in a tough position, because if you don't want to go through code enforcement, and then the education piece is really all that's kind of left. But I do know we need to move on because we have a stack of questions here. Hopefully that answers your question.
David, thank you for your question. Yes, we have quite a few in the Q&A box, and I'll start with anonymous attendee. Their question is, what can be done about residents that have washes on their property that fill them with dirt, causing backup of the wash and flooding other properties? Todd or Jeff?
Yeah, and this kind of goes to the point that Jeff just made. We really see a lot of this as an educational issue. But again, the key point about this public meeting is we need to ground truth everything and know what is actually going on out there. So with this particular example, please reach out to us, whether it's through the survey or the map or emailing me directly or talking to me. Part of what we would do is, again, we have to identify who the regulatory agency is if there's an issue, and then they would typically go out, they would talk to folks, and as Jeff mentioned, it's kind of an educational effort. And the reality is a lot of the general public don't realize some of these things. And, you know, after we go through that educational opportunity, there may be opportunities to kind of get these things corrected. So appreciate that question. Thank you.
Okay. Our next question comes to us from C. Schrader. The question is, if I sent the flood video in, when did the road cleanup on the last flooding on 7th Street and Blue Eagle Lane, will I need to resend you that video? We are in Desert Hills.
Yeah, if I'll jump in on this one. And I wanted to bring this up. I'm glad this question was asked because we did send out mailers after the flooding that occurred last summer, and we did solicit videos, pictures, anecdotal evidence, and we did receive a lot of that. And thank you very much, and we appreciate that. And no, you do not need to resubmit that. We have that. We have it cataloged, and we have it geo-referenced, so on maps. And we're going to be using that as part of your study. So the answer is no, and thank you very much.
Okay, we have some hands raised. Our next question comes from Liam Kosiolisek, and I apologize for mispronouncing that name. Liam, I am unmuting you. Go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, first of all, I wanted to say this is a great meeting to be a part of, and I want to thank you guys for having it. And secondly, I live just northwest of the Sonoran Preserve, and I ride my bike throughout the desert, and I know all these different washes and everything that's in the Sonoran Preserve by heart and memory by going through Google Earth and everything. Now, my question is, just south of Sonoran Desert Drive, just east of that community that sits in the middle of Sonoran Desert Drive for whatever reason, God knows, the Verdun zoning hearing, which is set to occur soon, how will the builders there, how will they understand the flooding risks that are going, or the floods that will occur on the land that they are looking to develop? Since that is literally a floodplain, and the Apache wash flows directly into that, and there is just a massive amount of wash, as well as the bridges that are on the Sonoran Preserve or Sonoran Desert Drive, in order to facilitate the flow of the water going south into the floodplain and towards Cave Creek and Cave Buttes Dam.
Jeff, if you don't mind, want to take a stab at that one?
Sure, absolutely. So I know exactly what you're talking about. I actually ride the trails there too, so I know them well, and I know where this planning case or the zoning case is located. And all I can say is that if that zoning case gets approved and the developers move forward with a master plan, they will be put through the regulations per the city of Phoenix that any master plan would be put through. And that would include proper management of storm flows, of flood flows. And so they'll be on the hook to figure out how they need to address whether it's a map floodplain or not, but their offsite flows, any of the flows that are impacting the site, and to not create adverse impacts, and to protect any of the structures that are part of that master plan. So, we can't affect that process, but we can tell you that they will not be able to cut corners on that. They will have to address those issues and manage it properly.
So will these builders have access to the topographical maps that you use with LiDAR in order to get the speed, velocity, or the velocity and the depth rates of the water throughout the floodplain just south of the Sonoran Preserve? Because that entire floodplain just completely fills up, and you could search on just Google 2013 flooding, and Cave Buttes Dam is completely full, backed up all the way. And
Yeah.
obviously that little runoff or that little spill gate that's in the middle of, or just to the left of Cave Buttes Dam, that's not enough to divert that water into that square section where there's two mountains surrounding, and then there's two dikes on the south side, as well as the Cave Buttes Dam on the north side. There's just not enough tunnel bore for that water to get through and be passed through. But with the Verdon communities, will they build their communities just on the banks of the river washes? Because that doesn't make any sense either. Because I mean, my community, which is Sonoran Foothills, they built the communities around the washes, and sure, we still have the water on the banks, but it's nowhere near as much of the flooding that occurs from Apache Wash, because Apache Wash gets all those tributaries from the north of Cave Creek, Carefree, New River, all those different places, as you guys know, brings it all down there. So
right. And we're not privy to their plan, and they probably haven't even developed their plan yet. But that said, they will be required to adhere to the regulations, whether it's FEMA's regulations, City of Phoenix regulations, state statutes, that sort of thing, to properly plan and manage the storm flows and the flood flows. And so how they do that, that's up to them within those guidelines, right? But I can't imagine that they're going to be building in the Cave Buttes flood pool or in the middle of the wash. There's other regulations that govern that as well. And so like I said, I can assure you that they will have to adhere to all the regulations that anyone else would have to adhere to properly develop their site. And they will have
thank you for your
access.
response.
Yep, and they will have access to all the best available data that they'll need to be able to do that.
Thank you for your question, Liam. Our next question comes from Danny Nimella. His question, or her question, is: are the preliminary flow maps available for download? Todd or Jeff?
Yeah, and I guess, and Hassan, correct me if I'm wrong on this. Once we get to certain milestones with this study, requests can be made through the flood control district for this information through a public information request. As Jeff had mentioned, we are still preliminary right now, and things will continue to be refined. And this is where it's so important that we kind of get feedback from folks that live in these areas. But I believe, yes, these will be available to receive. Hassan, can you just confirm that, please?
Yes, Todd, you're correct. Information with us can be available with the request. As a public records request, we can provide that data with the caveat that these are preliminary and will change by the time we get to the detail level with a lot more information in the computer models. But as of this time, this is, as Jeff mentioned in his presentation, they look very nice, colorful, but these are very preliminary, and the velocities, the depths, the flow locations, the flooding hazard locations may change significantly by the time we have the roadways, the bridges, the storm drains, the culvert crossings, all those put in the model. Things will change significantly. However, these are available after request, at your request, if you so desire to.
Thank you, Hassan. Our next question comes from a caller, Tom Fiden. Tom, I have gone ahead and unmuted you. Go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you, Flor, and team, to echo Liam's comments. Thanks for putting this together, guys. It's great. Quick question. I do live along Desert Hill, or excuse me, I'm in Desert Hills along Desert Lake Wash. Whose responsibility is it? Could you just briefly explain whose responsibility it is to maintain the washes? County, City of Phoenix, who should actually maintain these, or is it the homeowner?
Yeah, good question, and maybe Hassan may be better to answer this one.
I can jump in just to try. The underlying landowner is responsible for it, unless the landowner has given an easement to the jurisdiction, for example, City of Phoenix or Maricopa County. Typically,
Okay.
the agencies do not want to maintain washes as long as they're on private property. So basic maintenance should fall onto the property owner. And again, as a part of our education, as a part of our outreach to the communities, we may be preparing brochures, handouts to let property owners know how to, at a minimum, maintain your washes so flows can keep going through without getting blocked and without getting impeded and cause adverse impacts to other properties.
Okay, thank you guys.
Okay, our next question comes to us from Derek Doubleday. Derek's question is, can you provide a copy of these slides? Jeff, would you like to answer that question?
Todd, I think you're about to jump in.
Yeah. Yeah, no, this is an easy one.
Yeah.
Yes, as I've continuously referred to, our project website is going to be critical. So we will have an actual copy of the PowerPoint slides, which will be posted there. Probably be a few days before we get it posted. So we will have the actual PowerPoint slides, and then we will also have a copy of the actual recording. So everything is going to be available to everybody. And again, if you have neighbors that did not have the opportunity to attend this meeting tonight, please encourage them to go to our website and find further information. And yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, our next question comes to us from Tyson. His question is, if I have already submitted photos through your website in the past, do I need to do it again? Todd?
Yeah, and I guess my response to this is I'd rather the more the merrier. This is a specific study that you know I'm involved with, that is within this study area. I would definitely encourage you to resubmit them again, and then that way we know it is definitely captured as part of this public record, so that as Jeff and his team kind of continue to do the modeling, that can be an area that we take a look at as well.
Okay, thank you, Todd. Our next question comes to us from Alex. The question is, do you take into account the effect of wildlife on flooding risk? For instance, a recent fire in the Tonto National Forest near New River has anecdotally made flash flooding worse around my place off Fig Springs Road, northern edge of survey area.
And I guess the way I'll respond to this is, obviously this is another type of disaster event that has happened. You know, some of these things can happen sporadically, so it is difficult for us to kind of predict some of these items. In this particular situation, yes, absolutely. Once there's a wildfire, that reduces a lot of the ground cover, which means that, you know, as you get future rains, typically you have a lot of materials washing off the land. I would say that this would be typically dealt with separately. Now, with some of these events, they're actually declared as natural disasters. There typically is federal funding that can be available to help address some of these issues. I know with wildfires in particular, you can get a lot of culverts that get clogged up, you know, washes away potential other mitigation efforts. So, you know, is it something we're aware of as a potential risk? Yes, it is. Unfortunately, we can never predict where exactly the wildfires are going to be. So typically some of those things have to be dealt with more after the fact.
Thank you, Todd. Our next question comes to us from Zoom user. In your solutions, will any of them include canals? We'd like the natural preserve to stay that way, specifically Skunk Creek north of Carefree Highway. Todd or Jeff?
Jeff, why don't you take this one?
Sure. So we'll look at a broad suite of solutions, and we won't finalize those solutions without input from the public. from you all, from the residents in the study area. I can tell you that we look at both structural solutions and non-structural solutions, but we also want the solution to fit the environment, right? And we call that context sensitive solutions. And I think you're right. I think a channelized approach to Skunk Creek north of Carefree Highway probably doesn't fit the context, right? And so that's probably one, and I'm not going to say definitively, but that's probably one that would not make the final cut. And so, but there are other mitigation solutions that could be applied along those reaches, like levees, set back a little bit so you don't even really notice them, or that sort of thing, or channel improvements that incorporate the natural environment. But we don't know any of that yet. We're still early in the study and still trying to figure out the flood hazard modeling and identification first. But that's how we'll approach it. We'll approach it from a bunch of different angles. And one of them is your input, and the other is it the right solution for the environment?
Thank you, Jeff. Our next question comes from a call-in user, Zanes. Zanes, I have gone ahead and unmuted you. Go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, I was just curious about the Sonoran Preserve because it is such a beautiful piece of property. And thank you very much, by the way, for this meeting. It is a great deal of information, which I didn't have before. But I am wondering, the regulations that are in effect now seem to be hard for the builders that are trying to make a dollar to follow. And how's that going to be any different when you're dealing with a nice piece of property like that?
I guess I'm not quite clear on how to, could you maybe try and rephrase the question? And Hassan, if you have thoughts, just go ahead and jump in.
Let me take a crack at it. Sonoran Preserve is preserved land by City of Phoenix, and they have certain particular ordinances that protect the preserved land. And I know in that corridor, North Black Canyon corridor along I-17 on the east side, Phoenix has taken extra steps to preserve that land, so no developer can come in and impact those properties and take away the pristine natural beauty out of that. They can build around with certain regulations, and that's why they have a very strong development services department, planning and development services department, who will look into these plans to make sure that the preserved land is preserved, washes are preserved, are not destroyed. They may have to allow some minimal impacts, but nothing significant will happen or should happen to the Sonoran Preserve land, if that's what your question was.
I think I phrased that wrong. One of the first questions you received was a gentleman who lives down in the Desert Hills area. And when you go down New River Road South and it becomes 7th Street South, from Desert Hills Road down to the Carefree Highway, that whole area, I mean, that's very flat. And when houses are being built, I have friends who have horses that now stand in knee-deep water when the rains come, and they never had water before on their property. And I understand what the first man said. So I guess there's different rules for different parts of the land around here. But is that true then? They're more stringent on the preserve, I guess. But I guess I misunderstood that. I mean, they just don't seem to be being followed, and there's no repercussions for builders who come in and build, and then the guy next door is left with a new neighbor who doesn't really understand things, and it's not a good way to start when all you have are your neighbors out here. I mean, I'm very lucky. I have great neighbors. I don't get much water too bad, but it doesn't seem like it's easy to hold these builders accountable for things. Or maybe not the builder, but somebody's got, I mean, there's no repercussions for the guy who's lived here for 20 years and hasn't had any flooding. And you get, you know, Bob and Sue who moved next door, and they're all happy to live out here, and you're happy to see them. And next thing you know, your horses are in water up to their knees. So I guess I was curious how Sonoran Preserve was going to be protected when we can't seem to protect the properties that are already existing, but there's different roles, right?
Yeah, if
Sorry.
I'll jump in, or and Hassan, you wanna? Okay, yes, as Hassan mentioned, the preserve is protected, it's been codified as being protected, and so that I don't, that's probably not at risk. As far as the regulations go, the same regulations apply to everyone, and the developers have to adhere to those regulations to get their plans, their grading and drainage plans approved. What happens after that? That's the hard part, right?
Yeah.
It's probably hard to have a lot of oversight and know what folks are doing on their properties. And most folks probably don't want that oversight, right? You want to be able to do stuff on your
And you want to
property,
get along with your neighbors.
and you want to get along with your neighbors. And again, this is where that education piece comes in. That's going to be so important. But the other thing is, there are a lot of floodplains out there, and those are regulated through FEMA. So that's another regulation overlay that people have to adhere to. But if you're not in a FEMA floodplain, and just the amount of development that's occurring out there is inherently, even if everyone does everything right, it's inherently going to change things. And I think Todd mentioned this. And that's where we come in. We're doing this study so we can identify, at least as a snapshot in time, what the flooding conditions look like. And then we can start to figure out how to fix those. And it's not the same as it was 20 years ago, and it won't be the same 20 years from now, right? But we only can address what's there now and hope everyone does everything right moving forward. And so that's what we're striving to do.
Well, it looks great. Now, those first maps you had up, I mean, it's amazing. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you for your question, Zanes. On to our next question. Comes to us from anonymous attendee. We live on Skunk Creek. When it's in full roar, a huge amount of water flows by. Is there any way to not only channel this flow to prevent property damage, but to capture and hold it for use during the drier months, even if it's just for irrigation, etc.? Very good question, anonymous. Jeff, would you like to answer that question?
Yes, absolutely. So Skunk Creek is a major water course in Maricopa County. We'll look at the flood hazard adjacent to it. We'll come up with, ideas, solutions, brainstorm, that sort of thing. Like I was talking about earlier, channelizing Skunk Creek is problematic in that you're changing the natural environment and not letting the water, the river, for lack of a better term, do what rivers do. But I can tell you that one of the things we are going to look at as part of this study is how do we take our solutions and develop them such that we enhance groundwater recharge in this area. So get more water to infiltrate, to better kind of refresh the aquifers, because we know that's a big problem up there too. And we have a hand in this. We're managing stormwater, which is the historic source of that recharge. And so we're going to be looking at ideas like that. That's one of the goals of this study that we want to employ. But as far as what we're going to do with Skunk Creek in any given area, north, south, Carefree Highway, channelize it, don't channelize it, that sort of thing, we're way too early in the process to know that. But your input's important, and keep it coming for sure. But just recognize that there are constraints to major water courses like this, and that we want them to behave naturally for the most part.
Okay, Jeff, and we have another question for you. C. Schrader would like to know if I have a wash, it's clean. However, we want to make it a little wider and deeper. Is that okay?
I'll jump in. So it comes back to adverse impact or no adverse impact. If it's on private property, you can modify it as long as you're not changing the flow conditions as it leaves your property or as it enters your property. That adverse impact on your neighbors. And so that's a major theme of what we're talking about tonight, right? Now that said, that only applies if this is a not regulated wash that doesn't have a FEMA floodplain or anything like that. So I'm assuming that's the case. But yeah, if you want to change it provide more conveyance within your private property and it's not changing the flow conditions off your property, then I believe that's allowed.
Thank you, Jeff. Our next question comes from an anonymous attendee. Their question is the education program to include the obvious benefit to well water production through increased infiltration by swale, ditching, and water retention basins? Should there be a certain percentage of a property dedicated to natural landscape to assist with infiltration by code at some date in the future, especially now that we see certain water shortages coming soon? Todd or Jeff?
Yeah, and great question. I definitely appreciate this one. You know, at the district, we have a separate group who are called the Landscape Architecture and Water Conservation Group. So one of the things we are doing, for example, is we are starting to evaluate all of our structures for opportunities where we could look at things like infiltration through you know, existing properties that we have. But again, to the point of this whole meeting, these are the types of suggestions and solutions that we want to be able to explore. Obviously, living in the desert, we know that water shortages are going to become a bigger and bigger issue. The simple answer is you won't necessarily be able to do it in every situation, but we definitely strive to take advantage of those situations where we can, and we definitely encourage that. And you know, as Jeff has touched on in a couple of his points tonight, you know, water courses are going to do what they do naturally. And if we can take advantage of those situations where you can infiltrate that water, take advantage of sort of those natural flow areas, that's part of what these ultimate solutions and potential mitigations are for. So we do hope to get to the point that we can incorporate more of those types of things, but the reality is you can't implement them everywhere. Sometimes the hard engineered solutions are more favorable, but you know, obviously context sensitivity is kind of where we want to focus.
Thank you, Todd. Our next question comes from Sean and Debbie Zenker, and their question is, the National Weather Service in Phoenix predicts that Arizona is going to have a very wet and active monsoon season this summer, with nearly 70% chance of precipitation expected to reach near or above normal levels of rain. What is being done to prepare for such rainfall in the more vulnerable areas? Jeff or Todd?
Yeah, I think it's just.
I was going to throw this one to Hassan.
Right.
Yeah, I can jump in. As monsoon season is upon us within a few more weeks, like 15th of June through 15th of September, we at Flood Control District, we have a monsoon preparedness activity going on in our website, and we can provide you those links to the website where how to prepare for this extraordinary rainfall season that we are anticipating. Nothing may happen, but should some strong storm events occur during this time, how should the residents be prepared to protect themselves from severe flooding conditions and so forth. And we do that every year, annually, and I was in discussions with one of our staff members this morning trying to update our website information for this upcoming monsoon season. So we can certainly lead you to that web page or the pages where you can find those information if you leave your contact information with Todd or Jeff.
Thank you, Hassan. Our next question comes from an anonymous attendee. How will the washes be handled if they travel through existing ingress-egress easements that have been recorded at the county? Will or can they be moved to an alternate location in order to accommodate for the runoff? Jeff, would you like to
Sure.
answer that question?
Sure. So I think with all these with all the similar questions of what we're going to do and what kind of solutions we're going to develop, I think it's important to note that we're really early in the process, and everything's on the table at this point. So we really don't know what we're going to do once we have the flood hazards identified. We're going to go through the process to identify the appropriate solutions given the identified hazards. And that's a very defined process. And it includes input from you all. And so that's important to note here. So we can't really answer your question because we don't have enough specifics to answer that question, but I can say that everything's on the table. And there are certainly times when realigning a wash is appropriate. But for the most part, that's probably not a preferred approach, but there are times when that occurs.
Thank you, Jeff. And there's a follow-up question to that from anonymous attendee. Since I started scoping the ground at my property for food production, not a drop of rainwater that hits my property leaves the property except by evaporation or infiltration. Any comments?
I believe that's more just a comment that I think I think the point they're trying to make is that you can manage water on your own property, and I guess what I would suggest is direct you to within our slides. We did talk about one of the products that the district has put together called Reduce Your Flood Risk, and part of that is changing some of your landscaping so that you have some of the stuff that infiltrates, and things like planting more trees that it kind of uptakes some of the water. So very good point, and we appreciate that point being made.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you, Todd. Our next question comes from Liam Koshalek, and I apologize for mispronouncing your name. Does anyone know why there is 1 square mile of empty space in the center of Desert Hills?
I can answer that. So that is state land. It is, so it's part of the state land trust. It has not been auctioned because it has a significant flood hazard on it. I can tell you that state land is very interested in our study and partnering with us. They're one of the project partners on that we didn't mention tonight, but they're certainly a major project partner, and that they are interested in on how to improve that square mile, that parcel or whatnot. But that's the reason why it's state land, it's state land trust or state trust land, and it is encumbered by a lot of flood hazard.
Thank you, Jeff. Our next question comes from anonymous attendee. How do we discourage the mistake of raising landscape grades by bringing in material to fill in lower areas of a property?
Yeah, great question and point here. Again, I think this goes back to the education component of what the flood control district does. As we've touched on through this discussion about the study tonight, this is kind of an ongoing discussion with you, many of the homeowners in the area. If you feel you'd like us to perhaps come out to a homeowners association meeting or a community meeting and bring resources to the area that can help assist with that, we could talk to our public information folks and we can probably provide assistance with that. Really, the more we get those kind of resources out there, that can certainly help everybody else, because we don't want to flood our neighbors and vice versa. I don't think people are doing these things intentionally. They're just trying to divert water around their own property, but they have to realize there are issues where that then gets deflected elsewhere and it causes problems downstream. So, as much as possible, where you can implement solutions higher upstream, that has a greater ability to impact those folks downstream.
Thank you, Todd. Our last question of the evening comes from anonymous attendee. And the question is, has anyone in flood control looked at leaky weir systems developed by Australian farmers to slow flow and keep moisture in the ground or longer? Todd or Jeff, who would like to answer the last question of the evening?
Yeah, I'll take that one. And very good point. I'm not sure of the answer specifically, so I'll deflect to Hassan here in a second. But to your point of sort of slowing down flow, causing infiltration, and potentially, if there is any additional flow, kind of releasing it later after a flood event happens, those are all the types of solutions that we take a look at pretty regularly. So very good point. I will make a point of asking our landscape architecture and water conservation group about that, and very good suggestion.
Okay, and we have one last question that kind of sneaked in here by Zanes, and the question is, please tell me if there are any actions we in the community can do to keep the land from Joy Ranch Road to Cloud Road and 7th Street and 7th Avenue from being developed. Please, thank you. Todd or Jeff, who would like to take on that last question?
So I will not, I don't think I'm in position to answer the question, but I would like to identify that that is the same piece of land that we were just talking about a couple questions ago. That is that square mile of state trust land.
Let me jump in if I may. Developments will take its own course. State land property, trust land, they will at an opportune time will auction that piece of land for future developments. The community, if it's in City of Phoenix or if it is in Maricopa County, jurisdiction will come in and play the role of the bad guy and try to regulate the developments as appropriate. If there are flood hazards on the property, we will have to make sure the agency, from the agency side, to make sure that they are developed with proper guidelines, maintaining all the flood hazard regulations and no adverse impacts and so on and so forth. There is not a way, not a good way to say that thou shalt not develop. They will come, people will buy, but as long as they are built properly with hazards, keeping hazards in mind and appropriate mitigation measures, projects, alternatives are put in the ground with the kinder, gentler approach in mind, with many alternatives that we will be looking into as a part of our study, is going to happen. So the answer to your question is no, nobody can stop development, but we can regulate them to make it manageable and likable to the community, and so that it fits within the needs of the community and is accepted by the community.